Welcome to the Family Express podcast, where our destination is resilient and connected families. Come aboard with your hosts, marriage and family therapists Catherine DeBruin and Rhonda Evans, to explore the world of emotionally focused family therapy, a model developed by Sue Johnson and colleagues. Together with our guest speakers, our travels will map the EFFT landscape, highlighting lessons learned, shared fears, and the passion and curiosity that bonds our community.
Welcome back, listeners, to the Family Express podcast with Catherine DeBruin and Rhonda Evans. We are so glad to be back with you guys again for this episode. Our guest today is Rebecca Fitzgerald out of North Carolina. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and we're going to tackle a topic that you might say is trending in social media. And we really want to bring a voice to this topic around attachment through an attachment lens. We're going to talk about estrangement in relationships. Rebecca, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom and experience with us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, so let's dive in. Let's talk about first what you're seeing in social media. What are the narratives that you're seeing in social media? You gave us a number earlier as we did some prep talk for this episode. So let's dive in with, if someone were to jump on social media today, what are the things and the narratives that they're going to be seeing?
Oh, protect your peace. Cut them off if they're toxic, right? I think a lot of folks are hearing messaging about identifying distressing relationship patterns and some sense that if the relationship is challenging, go ahead, cut them off, take care of yourself. That's a big misunderstanding of what boundaries are. It's not what boundaries are. I think there's also this assumption that everybody who chooses to seek distance or even end a relationship with a family member is doing it flippantly, and therefore is just intensely reactive, or a snowflake unwilling to stand the heat. I don't think that is necessarily true, and I don't think it's necessarily helpful. There's unfortunately a dearth of research on estrangement, in social sciences, and yet what's been emerging out of Cornell in the last number of years is that the figure is pretty high. 1 in 4 Americans is estranged from a family member. 1 in 4 American adults is estranged from a family member. And that isn't necessarily consistent across all ages, all racial backgrounds, but it is quite common. I see a lot of folks dealing with stigma around estrangement. It is deeply painful for everybody involved, and yet a lot of the nuance is being lost, I think, in the public discourse. I see kind of 2 schools of thought happening mostly on social media. On the one hand, there is talk of among parents whose adult children have chosen to diminish contact with them or cut contact with them, who are understandably very hurt. A lot of them seem to be pretty surprised when that happens. They say it comes out of nowhere. And yet that contrasts with a lot of what I'm seeing among the adult children who have chosen to limit or end contact with a parent. Very often, adults are saying, I asked for my parent to stop misgendering me, or disrespecting my partner, or commenting on my weight, or ignoring the abuse that I suffered for years, or to stop using drugs. I work with a lot of folks who have a range from emotional neglect to having experienced severe physical violence and sexual abuse at the hands of their parents. And there are a lot of really intense emotions coming wise, but typically before somebody cuts off contact, they have asked for change from their parents and have asked for limits to be respected, for feelings to be respected. And there seem to be really 2 realities, like opposing realities happening. In my experience, and with other therapists that I've talked to or whose work that I've read, a lot of adult children are cutting contact with their parents as a last resort, or diminishing contact with parents as a last resort. And they only typically do that when it seems like staying in contact is more painful than having to live with that attachment relationship being out of reach for the rest of their lives. That's a high cost to pay.
Yeah, Rebecca, I'm remembering when I first moved to America and made a really good friend. And I remember just being so shocked when I heard that she was estranged from her family, from most of her family. Like she had intentionally decided to put those boundaries up. And I'd never really come across something like that before. I've certainly in South Africa, we have, I know families who are like have no contact with a family member, which is also estrangement, but it's the first time, like I've heard about it a lot here actually in the States, that a child would intentionally say, I'm done with my family members. Like that must be a very hard decision to come to. I'm imagining.
Hard decision to come to. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, estrangement, it's not a new concept. I mean, Bowen was talking about it in the 60s, somewhat sparingly, but it was still broadly hush hush, But there are people leaving their families in the Bible. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
There are so many social and cultural norms that tell folks that, you need to be connected to family. Family is very important. And so even when folks were experiencing emotional distance limits or permanent rupture in their relationship, it's typically something that people hesitate to talk about. It's my opinion that this is just something that's being talked about more openly as norms about mental health, relational health, self-help. All of those are becoming more common in the zeitgeist. And therefore, I think it's just being talked about more. I'm not convinced that it's happening more.
Okay. There's just maybe less shame around it. It's now out in the open, but some
of the shame is being contended with.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you said something interesting, which is there's a tremendous cost.
Oh, absolutely.
When one has to come to making a decision like this, there's a massive, massive cost. Can you speak more to that?
Absolutely. I've been treating adults who have been navigating estrangement for about 5 years now. And I also run a support group leading up in the 8 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving for adults who are estranged or are experiencing low contact or considering a low contact or no contact relationship with a parent. And what I find is that everyone comes in feeling deeply guarded and defensive and so braced to justify their decision to seek distance from their parent because they feel so alone and so isolated in having made this decision. And because social norms are to uphold the idea of a happy family. So if you don't have a happy family, what does that say about you? It's clearly something wrong with you, or you braced for somebody to say something is wrong with you. And yet, one thing that I'm working with folks is to try to understand the pain that led to whatever decision or decisions they're navigating. And from there comes out a lot of shame. Why couldn't I be treated with love and respect? Why couldn't I tolerate it when my, parent was abusing me or disrespecting me or neglecting me, et cetera? Why am I so affected by it? And yet it's so painful. One thing I normalize in my group is education about attachment relationships. The fact that this deep bond that a person has with their parent, no matter how healthy or unhealthy it is permanent. And the longing to be loved and supported by their parent is never going to go away. And so we're really trying to normalize awareness of grief, because a person who chooses not to be in relationship with their parent, or to really limit that connection with their parent, is choosing to grieve over being with them for the rest of their life. What an enormous cost. We spend a lot of time talking about the complexity of grief. It goes beyond sadness. I don't know if you've ever seen this image that describes grief as a tangled ball of yarn. And each layer has sort of a different complexity to it. At the center is denial, but working out, you've got anger, you've got resentment, you've got hopelessness, you've got sadness, you've got worry, you've got all of these intense emotions, and they all have to do with the enormous loss of engaging with this attachment relationship. It's deeply, deeply painful. And part of what I'm working with folks to do is to determine, can we sit with this grief? Can we grieve what you hoped your relationship would be? Can you grieve where you are now and determine what you want to do with it? Is distance the thing that continues to serve you, or is there room for a new relationship with this person that perhaps looks different than you hoped it would be?
What a beautiful visual of that yarn ball. And I think that's what makes life so complex, is when you have a variety of feelings all at the same time. Then it becomes hard to even feel one of them because it's not super clear. So organizing that out with support is so helpful. And Rebecca, that's interesting that in your groups, as you're supporting these estranged adults, you're also helping them not just identify all these different feelings, but to recognize that there's different kinds of relationships that you can have. And I'm just contrasting these estranged adults for whom there's so much work to do in terms of grief, with this American notion that your parent is meant to be like your best buddy. And how much, like, I remember coming to this country and then watching Gilmore Girls. It was a show that happened to me on TV. And I was like, what is this? I've never seen this concept before of this mom and daughter who are like best buddies and treat each other like friends. Like, I literally was like, could not watch the show because I could not relate to it. But if that's part of like our pop culture, and maybe that is normal in a lot of cultures, how painful for the adults, the 1 in 4 adults who don't have that with a parent, right?
Yeah. 1 in 4 adults being estranged from a family member is intense. The number of people estranged from a parent is slightly different, though. It is more common for an adult to be estranged from a father than from their mother. And it's also more likely for a mother to repair and reconcile with their adult child than they are for their father. And yet, if you think about America being like, one of the places where the pop culture ideal is manufactured and proliferated through our media, through everything, this ideal is set in place. I remember contrasting, my own family of origin experience with like the happy sitcoms on TV where everything's tied up at the end. And, it did sort of set me up to hope my parents would apologize when they hurt my feelings, which was not a norm in my personal reality. And so I do think that there is some bit of a contrast between people's hopes and expectations with what is reality for them. I also think, though, that most of the adult children that I work with, they don't expect their parents or even hope for their parents to be their best buddy. I think a lot of folks just want their parents to treat them with at least as much respect as they might a stranger, or as much consideration as they might with a stranger. One thing that I don't see a lot in the relationships of the people that I work with, or at least hear about, that the things that seem to be missing from their relationships is a reliable pattern of repair after rupture. I don't see repairs happening after rupture. Culturally, especially outside of the United States, especially in Eastern culture, there do seem to be a lot of norms around how repair is structured. It may not be a heartfelt apology, but there is some sort of cultural norm for how, after something goes awry, people get welcomed back into the fold, either through an act of deference or an act of affection. That is not normalized in American culture. There does seem to be more of a norm where some folks can take accountability. Some parents can hear about their kids' feelings as adults and show some sort of deference and respect. But I hear a lot about relationships where that's not the case. Perhaps if a parent is more comfortable with this idea that I'm the parent, they're the child, I deserve some level of respect and deference. If that doesn't become reciprocal, then their relationship is unlikely to adapt in a strong way to the child's process of growing up and individuating. It's going to make rupture inevitable, but the repair is not inevitable unless you have parties that are both working to repair that relationship. And unfortunately, I don't think American culture prizes or even prepares people to repair ruptures very well.
Oh, definitely, right? Like here we're talking about what pop culture is telling you is normal. And then you might have these kids who are thinking, I want to be that close, or a parent's going to apologize to me. And then you've got a different generation with parents that are expecting maybe obedience or deference or I mean, there's such a shift generationally around what we're being taught by social media that I'm sure you're seeing that expectations are just so unaligned, right?
So unaligned. That's absolutely true. Psychologist Joshua Coleman has been talking about this generational divide. He names that there is a higher expectation for adult children, among adult children, that their parents will do a little bit more self-examination, take a bit more responsibility for the impact that they have on their adult children. And, some families can navigate that change, but others are definitely not. And so that can definitely get in the way of repairs happening too. I think for a lot of parents whose adult children have chosen to limit or end contact with them, it's deeply upsetting. It brings up a great deal of grief and shame. That's never it's never what anybody wants. Nobody's best case scenario is estrangement until it's the only option left. I think a lot of parents whose adult children have chosen to limit or end contact feel surprised, feel hurt, but they also feel it's unfair. And I kind of find that they get stuck there, that there's some sense that, if my child wants to not, see me or won't see me or doesn't is negatively impacted or stuck on how negatively impacted they are, then there's nothing I can do until they change their mind. I also think that people's view of self really gets challenged in the stress of estrangement. A lot of So one spiel that I give a lot in my sessions with parents and with adult children are that, blame is typically not useful in relationships. That doesn't mean that accountability is not useful. Accountability is very important for the repair process. And yet, if you're looking for a person to blame for all the problems in the relationship, you're going to get stuck on opposite teams pretty quickly. I think the challenge is, especially when I'm seeing folks trying to navigate this generational divide, sometimes parents will hear, well, my actions hurt my adult children and they want to protect themselves from that. How can I accept that my actions were hurtful for them without shifting my view, accepting this idea that I'm a bad parent? So they think that if I hurt them, that must mean I'm a bad parent, and I can't tolerate the idea that I'm a bad parent. I'm probably not a bad parent, and therefore, I can't give credence to anything that my adult child is saying. There's this empathetic barrier coming up because there is this linking of a view of self with impact, and because these parents meant no harm, perhaps. Maybe they did sometimes, but if they meant no harm, how can I take accountability for the impact of my behavior? They're getting hung up on their inability to be curious about their adult child's experience.
Sure. Rebecca, let's go slowly here because this feels really important given how big these numbers are. And thinking about parents out there or caregivers who have lost contact with kids and are really struggling to understand what is going on. My heart just goes out to them and to those of you listening. What is your suggestion if you're chatting to a caregiver like this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think on both sides of estrangement, there's a ton of shame and a desire to be seen for having good intentions. I think that's a universal experience here. And so when I'm working with an adult whose child has sought distance from them, my first move is to help them understand that I see how hard this is for them and that they never wanted it to come this way. I often will spend a lot of time with them trying to understand what it's like for them to find themselves in this situation. But then the next move is to really try to help them express to me clearly what they wanted, what they intended, when this behavior pattern happened. Either the thing that their adult child is saying got in the way of their closeness, or perhaps the many things. Because one of the most challenging things is in relationship work is helping somebody understand how their intended outcome, what's the gap between the intended outcome of their behavior and the actual outcome of their behavior.
Okay, let me just see, because I really want to keep this, Rebecca, front of mind. So as you're talking to a parent, caregiver in this situation, firstly, sure, let's just make space for the feelings, because the grief has got to be like massive, 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 right? Especially like when they don't have access to children, grandchildren. Like it's so awful. And then the second thing you're saying is try to understand the intention, what happened, their intention at the time of whenever the rupture happened.
Yes.
Okay. So like find out about the rupture, their perspective of it, but really see their parental intention.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So often the intentions are good, or at least neutral to understandable in the context. Rarely does somebody want to torpedo their relationship with their child.
Yeah.
Over the course of a rupture.
Yeah.
But
Good
from
point.
there, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Catherine.
No, it's just a really good point. I really like how you're saying that. And then obviously this is making us think about the EFFT model of, what do you call it? Parental intent. Just working to get parental intent. Okay.
Yeah. The parent's intention matters so much in understanding why something happens, how something happens, and in helping us to understand the way the parent sees this relationship or what they want for the relationship. Unfortunately, our actions have unintended consequences in our relationships all the time. So we want to help parents understand how their behavior perhaps didn't necessarily convey the message they intended when the rupture happened.
So wait. So you're seeing the parent intention, and then you're getting curious, maybe through a question like, what do you think your child saw? What did your child hear? What did they see in your behavior? What might have they seen on your face? How might your tone have come across to them, do you think? Okay.
That kind of curiosity, is, I don't have a big enough word for vital to the repair process. Without
I'm interrupting you, sorry, friend, but do you find that, I'm so curious, do you find that parents are able to bring that curiosity to like trying to stand in the child's shoes a bit and see it?
Rarely at first.
Yeah.
The successful incidents of reconciliation that I have observed involve the parent getting understood, typically by the therapist, first, so that they can, justify their intention. And only after their good intentions are understood by the therapist can they be open to their child's perspective. But they have to be open to their child's perspective for repair to proceed. And unfortunately, I don't think that there are a lot of cultural drivers promoting that curiosity among parents right now. I think, I'm a millennial parent. I think there's a lot of my generation is really emphasizing, emotional validation and curiosity of our child's experience. I think that's normal for a lot of my peers. I don't think it's normal for for the generations above me. And when the assumption that deference and respect always points upward through the generations, if that's working with the assumption that curiosity and respect never goes back down, then that's just going to create this gap. So once the rupture happens, it stays and doesn't get repaired unless there is some mutual showing of respect and care given. And if that parent isn't willing or able to access curiosity about their adult child's experience of the rupture, then there's no way to repair it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the norms on social media, support groups I'm aware of, message boards, etc., even chatter in some communities that I've visited, where there are folks in generations older than mine talking about estrangement. There's this assumption that, the adult child is just ungrateful, the adult child is just too demanding, the adult child is petty or being manipulated by their spouse. There isn't any curiosity or deference of respect towards their adult child, which tells me that the parent-child relationship did not really survive the individuation process that happens when an adult child becomes an adult. Mm-hmm. And so until the parent can access some awareness and curiosity about their adult child's experience of things, there isn't a lot of room to get the adult child to feel less guarded and more open to their parents' influences again, which is really necessary for that repair to stick.
Yeah. That's, go ahead, Rhonda.
So this might I'm looking at our time and I'm thinking about something that might be tangential. So I want to be mindful of bringing this up at the end of our time together. What I'm kind of taking from this conversation is a tangential relationship aspect, which is when a younger sibling is quote unquote primarily parented by an older sibling, which tells you that the parent or parents were not as present. So the responsibility of caregiving and caretaking fell on the shoulders of an older sibling, and how that older sibling, younger sibling relationship gets stuck in continuing to parent the younger, now adult child, and how that leads to sibling issues. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm seeing the actual parent is like, yes, I wasn't available. I'm so sorry. Let me hear you out now. But then that sibling relationship struggles with the repair, the reconciliation, being able to hear the experience of the younger sibling. That's, again, totally tangential to what we're talking about, but it is what I'm thinking about as you guys talk.
Totally. I mean, I think you're right. I think the tricky thing about these relationships, I work with individuals, I work with couples, but when I'm working with them, we're working from the assumption that everyone is an adult throughout the time that is relevant to the time that we're talking about, right? That is not so with these family relationships, right? You're going from this time where there's an intense power dynamic, and all of these, attachment strategies are being developed and formed. And then over time, the power dynamic shifts, not necessarily the attachment relationship or the responsibility of the parent to be, giving care and wanting to give love and support to their child. And yet, as the relationship continues, as the adult child comes into adulthood, their dependence changes. They're going to become more aware of their own differences. And it's important for, if a relationship hasn't built in the resilience of being able to normalize rupture and repair, to offer psychological safety, to provide enough emotional validation. I think people can have unreasonable expectations about emotional validation. And yet I think if there's not enough respect for everyone's feelings and their belonging within the relationship in order to demonstrate care to one another after a rupture, those relationships become fragile. And until if that fragility, isn't bolstered by shared respect, shared commitment to doing work on the relationship, it will break.
And I want to circle back to how you started, because you're saying that relationship will break, and the decision for the estrangement is not flippantly made.
No.
The narratives in social media might be trying to portray a quick cut off, a quick cut off, but you're saying, in your experience, the decision for the relationship to take a different look, a different kind of relationship, parent to adult child, that is done with much anguish and grief and thought and time and a lot of reaches from the adult child, and it's not flippantly made.
Absolutely. I have worked with dozens of people who have chosen to go low contact or have a no contact arrangement with the parent over the last few years, and have talked with many more therapists who have navigated that. And I have never heard about an adult choosing to end contact with a parent without lots of efforts to influence change, attempting to communicate it, and really agonizing over the decision, even after the decision's made.
Right.
And it's sitting with ongoing pain. And yet, I think the challenge here is that there seems to be some expectation that, since estrangement is a newer, I guess, cultural concept that people are talking about right now, that there seems to be some assumption that the responsibility is with the child, to either fix it or to get over it or to adapt. And in reality, the estrangement only happens when it can't adapt to their parents' expectations anymore without some kind of shift. So if the adult parent wants the relationship back, there's going to need to be some mutual buy-in. And as we know from the EFFT model, that buy-in needs to come from the parent first in order for change to happen within the relationship cycle.
Oh, Rebecca, thank you so much for bringing this topic, which is clearly so relevant and so important to people who are just tremendously suffering in their relationships. And thank you for the group work that you're doing to support these adults, but also thank you so much for your care and concern for the parents and caregivers who are isolated from kids and grandkids because of this. And I think you give us some very helpful steps in terms of how to lean into their grief, how to see their beautiful parental intent, and then also to start to generate some curiosity and hopefully open up that system and bridge that gap. So thank you very much for being here with us.
I'm so glad to be here, and thank you so much for making space for this issue. I think our culture really stands to benefit from some changes, and I hope we can all be a part of that.
Yes, let's do it.
That's it for today, folks. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again for our next journey.